I imagine at one time you were this brilliant little child. As we enter into adulthood, what was brilliant in childhood can actually get in the way of you living the life you want to live. Hello, friends. I'm Nancy Houston. I want to help you live a better life. We're all emotional creatures who sometimes think. And so it's so important that we make this journey from our heads into the depths of our hearts. Welcome to the In-Between with Nancy Houston. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am very excited to introduce to you today just an incredible guest. I just learned about you, Kimberly, a few days ago, honestly. Mm-hmm. And so I read your book on Kindle, and I could not put it down. Kimberly has written a captivating book, and a book that I think can bring so much healing and insight to every single person. So I hope that you will pick up Kimberly's beautiful book. Isn't the cover beautiful?
Thank you.
I just love the cover. It's so lovely. And before we get started, I just wanted to read this beautiful intro that Cameron Diaz wrote for you. I thought that was so precious.
Yeah.
And it just felt like her foreword really described you and the essence of who you are and the book. So that's why I wanted to read it. So you never know when you meet someone what they really are going to mean to you. Mm-hmm. If they're simply a passing acquaintance or if they will become a lifelong friend, someone who will impact your life in ways you can't yet imagine. When I met Kimberly 15 years ago, she was introduced to me as my stunt double for a movie I was filming. And man, you have done some wild things in your career, haven't you? Like that motorcycle scene, my goodness, where you switch from back to front.
I did.
I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, you're gonna have to tell us about that. It was wild. When I shook her hand, I had no idea that I was meeting one of the great teachers of my life. Mm-hmm. A woman who time and time again had consistently shown me by example what true strength and courage look like. The Kimberly I met all those years ago is still in many ways the Kimberly I know today. Equal parts kind and determined, fierce and vulnerable. I love that part. Mm-hmm. I just thought, as I read your book, I'm like, that describes it. There's a fierceness to you and this incredible tender vulnerability. And I so admire that because that's just not a cocktail you find in people very often. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your life today, and then we'll go more into your story.
My life today in this moment.
Yeah.
I live in Los Angeles with my husband, who is a stunt coordinator, second unit director. Yeah. And we have a daughter, Capri, who's 9 years old. And I, for the first time in my life, have a normal, healthy life, which is very peaceful.
I know you fought hard for that.
Yes.
When we grow up I remember when I was reading your book, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I can identify with you, Kimberly. Like your grandfather sounded a lot like my father in some ways. I mean, differences.
Yes. But
my father was the one who was sexually abusive towards me.
Okay.
And he was a World War II vet and had a lot of his own trauma, right? And then he had a head injury from riding bulls in the rodeo. And
oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. He was wild. He was Wild Bill. He could have been a stuntman.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'm sure.
Yes, he could have been. Just had a lot of his own trauma. And then our mother sounded similar to me. I experienced my mother mostly as very shut down and disassociative, sometimes sad. Sometimes I would see her crying. And like sometimes at night, if I had a really bad dream, I would crawl in bed beside her. But she would cling on to me as if she's clinging to me for life. I didn't feel like I was able to cling to her for life. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
You were her mother.
Yes. Yeah. I quickly became her mother, and really kind of like the nurturer of my family, the empathic one, and the one trying to soothe and smooth everybody. So I know you had your role in your family, and there was a lot of family dysfunction and trauma and hardships. And so tell us a little bit more about that, what that was like for you.
For me, my immediate, family of origin, my parents, my siblings, there was a lot of unhealthy, toxic behavior happening within my family, but it did not compare to what was happening with my mother's father and that abuse. So for a long time, I don't think I really looked at how abusive my actual family was.
Yeah.
Because I had this other thing that was happening to me that was so much bigger and so much more unbelievable to wrap my head around, and so much confusion. So it almost felt like when I was home with my family that it felt more normal. So I never really knew what actual normalcy looked like or what actual love looked like.
Yeah, I hear you. And it's when there's big traumas going on, like sexual trauma, it can feel like neglect, emotional neglect, just not being seen or heard or felt, can be so minimized. Like, oh, well, that wasn't really that big of a deal. But then later you start realizing, like, wow, nobody felt my trauma with me.
Yes, or nobody acknowledged that it was happening at all.
Yeah.
Which is the biggest form of neglect that I think a child can receive in their life.
Yeah. It took me, because my father was so abusive in ways that you could not possibly ignore. It took me, honestly, like decades to realize that my mom was abusive in ways too, just because of her total neglect.
Yes.
And at times, like me screaming in pain and she just ignoring it,
Well, it takes a certain type of person to be able to marry that type of person.
Yes.
And so if she was at all connected with her body, she wouldn't have been with him in the first place.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So she most likely, we were talking before we started today, and I said, well, my mom died when I was 23, so I never got to know her story. But I'm guessing if you're that disconnected and shut down emotionally and unavailable, that my mother had her own trauma.
Yes, I'm sure.
And then my father had his own trauma. And so, like you talk about in your book, it becomes intergenerational. And it just keeps getting passed on and passed on and passed on until somebody like you says, no more.
Yes.
Yeah. How'd you get to that place of just like, no more? I don't want to pass this on to my children.
I was always in that place. It was just different levels of that place. Growing up, I was always the outspoken one, always the one calling things out for what they were. Mostly after my grandfather died, because while he was alive, I had, because of who he was, and now sort of being diagnosed without being alive from other doctors, I understand that he had some sort of like psychopathy. And my parents, I feel like the biggest thing that I had to do is come to terms with the fact that they knew on some level what was going on. I mean, my mom was abused her whole life, so she obviously knew who her father was, and there were many adults around. My mom's one of 6. My dad's one of 5, so there were many adults around that. To me, it's almost impossible to think that nobody saw him for who he was. So that was a big hurdle for me. And as I got stronger in my life, my voice became stronger. And especially after having my daughter, that was the biggest shift for me, of realizing that my family's trauma was bleeding onto her, not in the sexual abuse ways,
Right.
but in the ways that they were choosing to not cope with their trauma.
Yeah.
It was coming out in other ways and in their behavior, and she was witnessing that, and it just wasn't something that I was willing to have her around.
Absolutely. I have 4 sons.
Okay.
And I married my, I married my high school sweetheart. So I got married at 18 years old
Okay.
and started having children. I just remember when I was 6, my survival fantasy was to marry a man I loved and to marry a man who loved me.
Yes.
And even though I don't know if you call an 18-year-old boy a man, you know what I mean? But my dad was very powerful. He was a city judge,
Okay.
made a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I remember looking in my little vanity mirror at 6 years old and saying, I'm not going to marry for power or for money.
Interesting.
There's got to be, certainly my mother didn't marry him for love.
Right.
And the price she has paid to maybe have the things she's thought she wanted aren't worth having,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And so, we kind of have survival fantasies, don't we?
Yeah.
Ways to get us through. But you knew your family was leaking, even though your daughter wasn't being exposed to the type of sexual trauma you'd lived through.
Correct.
Yeah. How did you sense that, or how did you know that? What could you feel?
There's a certain way that families that come from where I came from interact with each other because of what happened to them. Yeah. And there was a lot of manipulation, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of anger, a lot of things being said and that were not appropriate. And I saw it when you see it through your child's eyes, I shut that down very quickly.
Yeah, it's when you look through life through your child's eyes, it's a rude awakening, isn't it? The things we thought were normal. And the way systems and children are groomed.
Yes.
To just begin, you look around like, well, everybody else is accepting this. Why do I feel like it's wrong? Is something wrong with me?
Right.
Did you ever feel that way?
I think because I was groomed as a child, my mother was groomed. We were all groomed to sort of, he was a very powerful man as well and did very well financially. And I feel that my grandmother that was enough for her. Yeah. She got everything she wanted. She could live the life she wanted to live. So it didn't really matter to her what was happening to everybody else. And grooming is a real thing. So we have to step out of that and start surrounding ourselves with people that think differently, do differently, behave differently in order to really see how detrimental that behavior is and how unhealthy it is. And once I started doing that, which for me, it was my stunt work sort of pulled me out of that, where I was able to be around really amazing women that were really successful, that had incredible hearts, that really cared about me, that I was able to start realizing that I deserved more and that this wasn't a healthy environment for me to be in, family or not.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you were able to get yourself in that spot where I remember in your book you had this aha moment, like, oh, maybe these are good people.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to help me. Maybe they'll be there for me.
Yes.
That was a shift, wasn't it?
It was a shift because I didn't have any self-worth and I didn't, when you're as young as I was and and I don't even really like to call it abuse anymore as I do torture because that's really what it was.
Yeah, it's a more fitting word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of the times these abusers that are grooming children will say terrifying things to you to make sure you never say anything, to make sure that the secret never gets out, which is what he did. And that is a terrifying place to be in when you're a 4 or 5 year old kid. So I didn't, those those things like play over and over in your head, even if you don't realize that that's happening. You know, you don't deserve to, you know, this is what you're here for, and this is what you're supposed to do, and no one's going to believe you, and like all the things that are embedded in our brain when we've been through something like this. It's a really hard thing to break out of and feel like you deserve anything better.
100%. It's all of that is so evil and manipulative. And it's more than a sexual act.
Yes.
It's this entire manipulation of this person's psychology and their emotional world and their psychological world and the way they think and feel about themselves. And I appreciate you calling it like a form of torment, because it absolutely is.
Yes.
And, you know, nowadays we can throw the word abuse around casually. And when we talk about things like this, there's nothing casual about it.
No.
Is there? You know, I admire the work you've done because I know how much work it takes. I remember, like, I was 32 when I started therapy.
Yeah.
I wish I would have been younger, of course.
Yes,
right.
We all do.
Don't we? Like,
Yes.
I wish I could have started when I was 5. Wouldn't that have been great? To start doing play therapy at 5. That would have been fabulous. But I remember just like trying so hard to keep it all under wraps. And even the day I kind of fell apart, I just cried all day.
Yeah.
And I kept going out to my husband saying, hey, is there something wrong with you? I needed it to be him, not me.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I really did. I'm like, it can't be me. It can't be me. It can't be me. You know, I've got to hold it together.
Right.
Because that was always the message.
Yes.
Like from my mother is like, you hold it together and you don't ever let there be any implication that anything's going on.
So she was aware.
Oh, how could you not be? I mean, she would be in the room when my father would beat me because he's very physically violent. And I remember I had a younger brother, John. And I just love my little brother. And so if it was dinner time and if he wasn't there, I'd run down the street and, John, you've got to get home. You've got to get home. And so we'd get home and then Dad would, at the dinner table, take off his belt, snap it in two, you know, total intimidation, right? And then put my brother over pull down his pants. So to be incredibly shaming to my brother. And then put him over his knee and whip him. And he'd look at me and say, and if you cry, you're next. And I could look at my mom and my sister and go, oh my gosh, how do they stay stone cold?
Yeah.
I couldn't figure it out.
It's total disassociation.
Right?
Yeah.
And I almost had like some envy because I couldn't help but cry and then I'd be next, you know? And I hadn't learned how to disassociate in those ways.
Because you weren't meant to.
Right. I know, apparently.
That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. I know. And, you know, my brother isn't, you know, he didn't live, you know. It was just so much for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even my mom died of pancreatic cancer at 49 years old.
Wow.
And back then the doctors were kind of mystified. Like they'd say, well, usually this is an old woman's disease.
Right.
Why are you dying of it at 49 years old? And I'm like, oh, I know why she's dying of it.
Right.
She's lived in hell.
Yeah.
She's lived in hell and never spoken up. Never found her voice.
And guilt does incredible things to your body.
Horrible things. You know, have you found that challenging that it's okay for you to have needs? Like when you're in your healing process, like it's okay for you to need to verbalize or to rest or to eat or to slow down or, you know what I mean, to take good care of yourself.
Yeah.
Was it okay for you to have needs? And
no, I think I struggled with that for a really long time. I'm getting better at it, but I definitely have struggled with that. And also because a lot of my trauma manifested itself in eating disorders and in some negative ways of sort of dealing with it. feeling like I could have needs was it wasn't something that I really accepted for a long time.
It can be so hard
Yeah.
for people who've had any kind of abuse or shame or trauma.
Yes.
Because actually having a need can bring up tremendous feelings of guilt
Yes.
and shame. Like, I'm not supposed to have needs. I'm supposed to suck it up. I'm supposed to keep going. I'm supposed to be silent. I'm supposed to be superhuman. And then you find yourself in a career where you kind of are superhuman.
Yes.
I mean, what was that like for you?
It was really eye-opening, and I speak about that in the prologue of the book, about how I got hurt on set, and it was really bad. And
Your face is cut with glass. You've gone through glass?
I went through a window.
Oh my gosh.
On purpose. Just, we were doing like a high fall out a window. I was on a descender, which basically is you're on a wire, and the wire stops you about 5 feet before the ground. So they're filming us coming out of the window, and then our wire stops us, so we never hit the ground. But, they set up really good porta pits, which are extremely thick mats. So if, God forbid, anything happened. But it was a 22-foot jump. So when we did it, like, on camera, my wire, malfunctioned. And so I was coming out the window, and it didn't stop me. And because the window broke, when the window breaks in front of you, the window, obviously the glass falls first, landed on the ground. I landed after in a pile of glass with my face.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And, for me, there was a lot of, at that time, feeling of, I remember, everybody was freaking out about it. And I just said, I'm going to go to my trailer. And I grabbed a bottle of peroxide from the medic. And this is when the survival comes in of just like, okay, well, this is what's happening. And I went into my trailer and I had a bottle of peroxide, and I was just like, my whole face was just torn up. And I just took a bottle of peroxide and poured it over my face and put some Band-Aids on. And I was like, I want to go again. I want to do it again. And I stayed at work for 6 hours, and because the reset of the window was about an hour and a half. So I stayed at work and I did 3 more takes. And then we broke for lunch, and I said to my boss, I said, I'm going to go to the doctor. And he's like, yeah, I've been trying to get you to go to the hospital,
Yeah.
So I went, and, 80 stitches later.
80 stitches. Oh my goodness.
But it was something that it was the correlation between having pain on the outside that matched how I was feeling on the inside was when I really, and in the book I say this, like, it's time to go back to therapy, because it was something that I enjoyed people saying to me, like, oh my God, are you okay? Oh my God, are you okay? And I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until that happened. And that was a big, like, aha moment for me.
I hear what you're saying. I was super accident prone as a child. And I wonder if it was a way to try to get
Attention.
some love.
Yeah.
Maybe some comfort, some warmth, some nurturance.
I'm sure.
Right? And that's what you were seeking.
Yes.
Like, it's almost like this cry for help. Like, oh, for a moment, your insides and outsides were matching.
Yes.
And it's almost like, oh, the picture now feels right.
And also I deserve this whole, like, subconscious feeling of this is what, I didn't, so much of my childhood was a lot of, my grandfather was very much like, I was the chosen one, which was not
No, that's how.
and any means a good thing, but it was very known in my family that that's what it was. And there was a lot of jealousy in that, which is completely sick and crazy. But I grew up in that, like, feeling like, so I think when my face got hurt, it was almost like, maybe I'm going to be ugly enough where, like, no one's going to want to be with me, kind of thing.
It can become a way a woman attempts to keep herself safe.
Yes.
From male attention.
Yes.
Can't it? Yeah. That's what you just said there. it shows how complex trauma is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, you're the chosen one, which is horrible. It's horrendous. It's terrifying. And then there's some jealousy, and which is, I don't even know. I don't know that I have language to describe how wrong that is.
Yes.
What did that feel like for you?
I always felt like I had to show up and be less than for my sisters to feel like I wasn't that important, because I felt guilty for being the one. And my grandmother was always very much like, oh, you know, Kim's so beautiful, and Kim, you know, and it's so ironic because it was so opposite of what I felt inside. And I say this in the book, you know, I had a thing, I was like always looking in the mirror. I would walk down the streets of New York and always look at my reflection. And I remember being with one of my sisters, and she's like, oh my gosh, you're constantly looking at yourself. Like, stop looking at yourself. And she always took it as I was looking at myself because I thought I was, you know.
So gorgeous.
Yeah. And really I was just looking for somebody better to look back at me.
Wow. You're looking for someone better to look back at you. Tell me more about that.
I believe, or I know that when this kind of trauma happens to you at such a young age, when you are having experiences, you know, sexual experiences when you shouldn't be, by somebody who is supposed to love you.
Yes.
It is, I mean, the damage is almost like irreparable in some ways. And there is no sense to make of it. And so we come up with all of these things in our head to cope with what happened, and none of them really make sense.
No.
But it's just the way I think I was getting through my days at that time.
The brain is trying so hard to
protect me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to make some sense of the story. I think that's why so many, I loved what you said in your book, that I feel this way as well. Like, you know, I get why people call themselves survivors. But I like what you said. Like, I think of us more as thrivers.
Yes.
You know, and when we do our work, then we really do get the opportunity to thrive.
Yes.
I feel that way. You feel that way.
Yeah.
There's so much hope for us. You know,
Yeah.
It's not irreparable, even though it can feel irreparable.
It can feel that way.
Yeah.
I also do believe that if we really, once we start doing the work and get in touch with our inner child and get in touch with just our gut and what we feel, is when we can really start to explore who we were born to be.
Yes.
Right? Because who we were born to be was sort of taken away from us.
Yeah.
So for a really long time, I didn't know who I was, and my identity was so tied to him because that's all I knew.
Yeah.
Was what was happening to me.
Yeah.
So when he died, it was like I was trying to figure out, okay, who am I? Why am I here? And what is this all for? Which was a really confusing, painful time for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when somebody's used your body and sent this message, you are here for my sexual pleasure. Oh my goodness. That is so utterly confusing for the child. And then the message is, and you're also here to please me. And I know for me that, oh man, that one has been a long journey for me.
Yeah.
You know, and I've shifted how I look at this journey that you and I are on.
Yes.
You know, when I first started therapy, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this for 6 months, and then I'm going to be all well.
Oh yeah.
Oh, did you ever think that?
I hoped for it.
Yeah. I know, right? Maybe that was it. I had all this wishful thinking, and then after a year, I'm like, oh, okay, you know. And then after a couple of years, I'm like, you know what? Maybe this is just going to be a lifetime.
Yes.
And I just need to learn how to stay curious and kind with myself, which is really hard to do. because when you've not experienced somebody being curious and kind with you as a child,
Correct.
We learn to hold ourselves the way we were held, right?
Yes.
And so if there's just a lot of neglect and abuse and ignoring and dismissing and minimizing and using humor and gaslighting, man, it's so easy to hold ourselves that same way.
Yes. And when we're introduced into the world with all of the simple things, whether it's, I've been doing a lot of work with like the ground.
Yeah, grounding.
Really silly.
Yeah.
Not grounding, yes, but also just the ground, because I realized just how I was introduced to this world was in such a violent way that everything that you should feel safe with, like walking on a trail or looking at the sky or being in nature, everything was so foreign to me because every memory I had was somehow connected. Everything that should have been a positive memory was somehow connected with a negative, some negative experience that happened to me. So it was really hard for me and still difficult for me to separate the two sometimes.
So do you just go outside and maybe like just feel the ground underneath?
I've become that person. I'm like in my bare feet, walking around my house. I'm like, ground. Doing those things and being aware of them, and it's really healing.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Well, trauma, I know for me, some of my trauma memories would emerge as me being chased down a street by my father, who and his goal was to sexually assault me. Right. And so I hear what you're saying, and I think, I feel like for me, we didn't know much about body work when I started doing my work.
Yeah.
That was like almost 40 years ago that I started doing my work. It's been a long time ago. And, it was this whole new world where people really didn't talk about sexual trauma.
Right.
And we didn't know. I don't think we knew. Maybe, I'm sure some knew.
Yes.
Some professionals knew. But it wasn't common knowledge that, you store sexual trauma
in your nervous
body.
system. Yeah.
And we hold our breath. Right? I'm like, I can breathe.
Yes.
I don't think I'd ever breathe. You know what I mean. We breathe enough to stay alive, but
yes.
Do you remember feeling that way?
Yes, and still in certain situations, I can notice it, and I'm like, okay, Kim, you're holding your breath. You need to relax, or I'll do. It's a lot of like the shoulders, a lot of that, or just like the protection mode.
Yeah.
Thankfully, now I've become more aware of that, and I can notice it when it's happening, and just kind of relax, and then also try to tap into what made me tense up and why that is, and to be curious about it all so that I can move through it and the best way that I can. But yes, it's stored in our nervous system, and that's the biggest thing that I am super grateful that's starting to be spoken about much more. I think the main reason why sexual abuse isn't spoken about as much as it should be is because most of the time it happens within families.
Totally.
And there's so many layers to that, and there's so much fear around saying it out loud and what's that going to do to the family members, or who's going to feel this way. And I think the more work you do on yourself, the more you realize that speaking out is the strongest, bravest, most important thing that you can do for yourself and for so many people that are still suffering in silence because they feel like they don't have the strength to say it, because maybe it's their father who they still have a relationship with. And also when we look at, like when I had to look at my grandparents, I also had to really look at my parents and the role that they played in what happened to me. And that's a really tough one. So It all sort of peels off in layers, but it's really important to peel all the layers off and not just get stuck on the abuser.
Yes.
So many times we do that. We get stuck on, you know, my grandfather was this horrible person, and that's just what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my life and heal from it. But you can't heal from that because it wasn't just him. No. It was the whole family system that created this world where he could behave and do the things that he did. Yeah. They, you know, were basically part of it. They were participants.
Exactly. Yes. One of my first memories was I don't know if it was a Saturday morning, but nobody was getting up to go to school or work. So it's a weekend. And my little brother was still in a crib, like he was probably 9 months old. And he'd wake up. He must have been more like 9 months old, maybe a year. And he had wood floors, and there were wheels on the bottom of the crib. So he'd start rocking his crib till it started bouncing against the wall and banging. And then I would hear my dad go in and beat him. And he's an infant, you know. And I would lay in bed, and I would be like 3, and think if that was my baby, I would get up and get that baby and put that baby in his stroller and get that baby as far away as that bad man I could get. Right? And I'd think, what is wrong with her that she doesn't get up? Meaning my mother. Right. What is wrong with her that she, like, it's like my mother didn't have that natural mama bear instinct. Do you know what I'm saying?
It sounds like she was pretty traumatized in her own life that she was able to, because I see it with my mom, like she can completely disassociate from her body. Yeah. And she's done it in so many ways. And then I also feel that when you have been through things like this, because you disconnect, because you have to leave your body in order to even deal with what's being done to you, it's really hard to ever be in your body.
It really can be, can it?
It has to be a conscious,
a very conscious
decision and work that you choose to do. Yes, because it's it's like when something traumatic happens, I would leave my body as a kid, and so I watched that progress with my mom through her life, and so when I would want to talk to her about something that happened to me, or I wanted to share a memory with her, or ask her a question, I could literally see her like leaving her body.
Disconnect.
And it was just this sort of blank slate on her face where I was talking to a piece of paper. Yeah. That's how it
called
felt.
It her still door.
She called it her still door.
Oh, she did.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And she had done that for so long. It was just her, not second nature, but her first nature.
Yes.
They say that oftentimes that daughters who are sexually traumatized oftentimes have mothers who have also had sexual trauma. And they learned how at such very young ages to completely disconnect and disassociate and have so much of that disassociative amnesia that their own memories have not come up.
Yes.
And so if their daughters do start testing the waters to see if it's safe to talk to mom, and they can pretty quickly learn, like, oh, like mom's not there.
Right.
This is like talking to a wall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's really detrimental to your healing.
Oh, it is.
To do that.
It really helped me. Because like I said, my mom was already gone when I started my healing. And so back then it was big on you confront your abuser.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can be super re-traumatizing and dangerous.
Yes.
You know? So I remember attempting to have conversations with my dad about, just even on the phone. And he would, because first of all, my therapist said, because, you know, I was my dad's emotional caretaker. And so he's like, okay, for you to even heal, you're going to have to create distance from this man.
Yes.
Because he is such a dangerous, narcissistic man. And so, you know, I had created that distance much to his disapproval. Like him saying, how dare you? You are the most selfish human in the whole entire world. Right. But my therapist's like, no, you're not being selfish. This is healthy. Because, you know, there's that part of me like, I can't be selfish.
Yeah.
Like, that's like the mortal sin or something, to be selfish, to take care of myself. Right. So, yeah, but I remember like, hey, Dad, I have these memories. And I thought I'd start with what felt like the most benign of the memories. Like, I have this memory of you punching me and slapping me and pulling my hair. And he's like, let me think about it. Hung up the phone. And then I'll call you back. And then he called me back 20 minutes and said, I have absolutely no memories. That absolutely did not happen. You know?
Right.
And I'm like, wow, so how do I deal with that? And, you know, I continued to have to really learn how to set really great boundaries, which is really helpful. But I think also one of the things that I don't know why this is helpful for me is I remember just like, okay, God, how do I do this? Like, how do I do this, God? Like, I need some guidance here.
Yeah.
And the thought that came to me was, well, Nancy, if you had done to your children what your dad had done to you, would that be easy for you to allow those memories to float up to the top? And I'm like, oh my goodness, that would be excruciating. You know, because I was kind of like you, like I had this deep, 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 deep desire to do different for my children.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And now I have these 4 amazing sons, and and I didn't do it all well. You know what I mean? But I know I just like, oh my gosh, I want to do this different. And if I'm going to do it different, I'm probably going to need a lot of help. Because, you know, it's one thing to want to do it different. It's another thing to actually do it differently.
Yes.
You know? And like, I love that you got to do a lot of your work before your daughter was actually born, even though you continue to do your work. I would have loved for that to have been my story, you know, my story. That wasn't my story. But in spite of not doing my work, we knew that we needed to get our children away, far, far away from both of our families.
Yes.
Because, you know, in some ways, like will find like. So we both had our dysfunctional families. And we had tried to set boundaries, but they were boundary haters. They just hated it. So we had to move far away.
Yeah.
So tell me about you. What's that been like with, I mean, you've had conversations with your mom. You've had conversations with your dad. You've been very courageous in having conversations. What's that been like besides the steel door?
Yeah, I don't speak to anybody in my family anymore.
You don't?
No.
Yeah. I know Aunt Pat was your safe person.
She was. And it's also uncovering for me with her as well, because she was the first one to come forward about my grandfather when she was 9 and wasn't believed. And that was just sort of that. But she grew up also knowing who he was and
didn't.
So it's very complicated and
so complex, isn't it? Because even though she tried to be warm towards you, she still knew what you were facing.
Yeah. I believe that her Alzheimer's was directly because of the abuse. I think she couldn't handle it anymore. And so her brain just shut off. And I do believe that.
Yeah.
With my parents, I'm just at a place where I accept who they are.
Yeah.
And I also accept that it's not who I am and that I don't have to have a relationship with them in order to heal and move on. And matter of fact, in order to be the mom I want to be, I can't have a relationship with them. And when I said that to my mom, you know, there were things that were happening in the family that were just not healthy and behaviors that were not healthy that were sort of bleeding onto my daughter. And I just wasn't willing for that to happen. And I said to my mother, because I had moved her close to me to sort of, she needed help and I was kind of helping her. And I had said to her, this is about 6 months ago, you know, Mom, I just can't keep trying to convince you to treat me better. Like I just have to, I have to step away. And it was really interesting to see her reaction, because in a week she had put her place up for sale. And the week after, I came home and there was my entire life in boxes on my driveway.
Wow.
So that was and I'm at a place where I can see that it's all my mom could handle. Mm-hmm. That if she believes if she goes there that she'll never return. Yeah. And I have other siblings who are living that way as well. And it's easier for her to be in that situation than it is to be with somebody who is constantly forcing her to look at herself.
Yeah.
And she feels like she's done enough work, and she's been in therapy forever, but you could be in therapy for 50 years. And if you're not seeing the right therapist, you're not healing and you're not doing the work. So I've accepted it all, as painful as it is and as sad as it is. It just, I've been through too much to try to fix everybody anymore, which is what I tried to do for a really long time.
Isn't it true? We go into fight, or we go into flight, or we go into fix.
Yes.
Oh man, it's so exhausting, isn't it?
Yes. Not when you walk away, though.
No, it's not.
Very liberating and peaceful.
Yeah, you can stop doing the fight, flight, or fix.
Exactly.
And your nervous system can at last be at rest.
Yes, and your inner child can be at rest because she's in fight or flight. Whenever my mom was around, she was felt really unsafe and really, just not connected. Mm-hmm. And it was the opposite of the work I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And what was the most interesting and sort of a gift, when my mom left everything for me, in one of the boxes was all of the Mother's Day cards that I had written her throughout my life. Probably started when I was 8, when I could write. And every single letter started with, "Dear Mom, I'm so sorry that I'm a bad daughter." Or like, "Dear Mom, I'm so sorry that I'm disappointed you." So every letter started with, "I'm sorry." So I realized in that moment that I've been mothering her my whole life, and I've been apologizing for who I was in the world and who I was showing up as. And it really brought everything full circle for me to make me realize that I need to stop apologizing for who I am. And when we have been through abuse, we're conditioned to apologize for everything because we think everything is our fault.
Absolutely.
So I'm still actively working on just apologizing just in general for everything I should be apologizing for.
Excuse me for breathing. I'm so sorry.
Right. But
excuse me for existing. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Isn't that true?
But that's exactly where it came from.
Yes.
It came from me feeling like I needed to say I'm sorry to my mother for everything that was not my fault.
Boy, I hear you. And the conflict it created, where here you are working so hard to allow that little girl inside of you to heal.
Yes.
And for you, the wise adult, to start loving her, accepting her, nurturing her. And your mom is actively doing the opposite. No, I want to be entirely 100% disconnected from that inner child.
Yes.
That inner child ruined me. And I love it when we can get to this place, because, I mean, that's what so many trauma survivors believe. It's what I believe. Like, there's something deeply wrong with me. I remember in first grade, I was walking to school by myself one day, and I looked up the sky, and I'm like, I didn't know the word shame. I'm 6, right? And I'm like, I'm embarrassed of me. And I'm like, I felt so much shame. At 6, that, yes, I think I felt like I needed to apologize for taking up space in the world because there's something so inherently wrong with me. But don't kids do that, where they internalize, and to make sense of it all?
Yes.
Because there's no way the brain can make sense of all this terror.
No.
So it's like, well, there's something wrong with me, and it's almost like it helps the brain go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I'll apologize all the time. And I'll apologize to Mom for being such a horrible disappointment, and that I can't be perfect enough. Your stories of your mom remind me of my mom. Like, you gotta look perfect, you gotta act perfect. And even like a few years ago, I noticed that I would have my highest anxiety when I was packing to get ready to go on a trip, or maybe I'm speaking or something. And the night before, and I'm like, okay, what's this anxiety?
Yeah.
And I finally got in touch with, it's not okay to show up not looking right.
Yes. Because if you look good from the outside, everything's supposed to be good on the inside, which is exactly how I grew up.
And that, and you know, Kimberly, I'm older, and this just gets harder and harder to attempt to maintain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that has created me so much anxiety deep down inside of myself that honestly I wasn't aware of, because I just lived with it my whole life.
Yes. And it's interesting because my daughter, the first Christmas where she was sort of dressing herself, or, you know, she put on sweatpants and whatever and I was like, it's Christmas, you have to wear. And then I sort of stopped. She said, why, Mom? And I said, yeah, exactly why. I said, I don't care. Don't even brush your hair. It doesn't matter.
Oh, and that,
you know, but it's ingrained in us to believe that. And my family was very much that way. My grandparents had money, and it was very much like how everyone viewed us and how everyone felt, you know, on the outside looking in, but nobody was seeing how the dysfunction and the abuse that was happening inside the home.
The torment that goes on behind all the pretty and all the perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's devastating. Yeah. So you had this baby girl.
Yes.
What was that like for you?
It was really challenging in the beginning. I didn't realize how many challenges I would face. I had a really difficult time breastfeeding her, which is, I had to Google it and all the things. It's actually, when you've been abused, it's a sensory thing, and it's can bring up a lot of flashbacks, which was really devastating for me, because I had already felt like he had taken so much from me. But it also gave me this sort of strength to even work harder at myself, and even work harder at figuring out what I needed to do so that she would never have a sliver of my life or what I had been through. And I was certainly not going to ever put my stuff on her or my anxiety on her. So it kind of made me work even harder at it. And now I have this incredible, like, she's so authentic, and, you know, even if I'm going out and putting like mascara on, she's like, I hate when you put makeup on, Mom. It's just not your authentic self.
Really?
I'm like, oh gosh, I've taught you too well. Stop it.
Oh, that's so precious.
Yeah, she's
really something, isn't she?
It's amazing what happens when you are raising a child from a healed space.
It's tremendous. It's a whole different place to come from.
And when you can acknowledge, and I'm not a perfect mom, and I have my moments, and I lose my temper, and things happen, but it's the repair. It's the me being able to go in her room and say, you know what, Capri, Mommy shouldn't have raised my voice. This wasn't about you. Mommy got upset and frustrated, and that's not okay. And I'm sorry. Will you accept my apology? My parents never apologized to me for anything.
Mine neither, ever. Not one single solitary time.
So she feels validated and seen, and feels like, you know, and I say to Mommy's a human being. I'm not always going to say the perfect thing. I'm going to try to, but sometimes it just doesn't come out that way. And I'm going to work on it. And I know I need to work on it. And those conversations are so important, because as parents, we are going to make mistakes and mess up, even if you don't have trauma. It's just what happens.
It's being human.
It's being human.
Yeah.
And the things that trigger you in your kids are things that you need to heal in yourself.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes it's just, from trauma, we learn how not to care for ourselves very well. And so it can sometimes just be exhaustion and being overtired.
Yeah.
And that's like, oh, that's the way I self-abuse. And so I don't have the bandwidth for this kid that I really want to have, but I've spent it all.
Yes.
And I'm just feel like I'm on empty.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I so appreciate what you just said. I remember thinking as a kid, like, even as an adult, like, gosh, it would have been, because I think kids are so forgiving. You know, when they're little, they're just so forgiving.
Well, you're their lifeline.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, I loved my dad. I mean, there are parts of him that I so enjoyed and admired as a little girl. Right. I admired and respect their parts of him, that are just like the devil himself. And it's like, for kids to hold that is just too much.
It's too much.
But if a parent could say, I am so sorry. So that was one of the things my husband and I did with our kids too.
Yes.
Was we told them our stories. Now, age appropriate.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But like, hey guys, we don't want you to have to learn all of life the hard way. And we want you to know that if anyone touches your body in this way, you can talk to us about it. Because like I had people touch my body in ways that weren't okay. And, you know, just to be able to say, hey, here's our stories. Again, age appropriate.
Right.
Don't be weird, parents. And to be able to say, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Mommy lost it.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, honey. You did not deserve for me to yell at you or be impatient or to be unkind. And yeah, I'm so human.
Yes.
You know, and us mommies, man, I say sometimes once something comes out of our womb, you know, like guilt and shame can come with it. Like we can guiltify ourselves so easily.
Yeah, it's all of the things. And me writing my book obviously has brought up so many questions with her. She's very intuitive. She's, you know, she is very much wants to know all the things and constantly asks me, well, what is the book about? You know, mommy's life. Well, you know, she said to me, well, when something happens at school, Mom, you want an example. So I want an example of what you're talking about.
Oh, wow.
And
she is intuitive, isn't she?
She is. And it's difficult when you didn't have any sort of boundaries or appropriateness growing up.
Yeah.
I'm learning, you know, I have to sort of check in with myself. What is appropriate for me to share with her right now and make sure that I'm not oversharing. And so the way that I just sort of put it to her was, you know, mommy and daddy's number one job is to protect you. And she said yes. And I said, well, mommy wasn't protected when she was a child and I was badly hurt. And she just hugged me and said she was sorry. And that was it. And so many people in my family want to keep it from their children. And I just think it's such a disservice to them.
It's such a disservice. I love what you said earlier. You know, for years we had all this stranger danger.
Yeah.
And that's what we were, you know, we were being good parents.
Yes.
We trained our children in stranger danger. And then, oh my gosh, it's so not true. It's family danger.
Yeah. Yes. And I always say that to her. If somebody doesn't, usually I'm pretty good at knowing, but I tell her all the time, like, not all adults are safe.
No.
Just because they're your teacher, just because they're somebody that you're supposed to look up to and listen to, doesn't mean they're safe. If you don't get a good feeling from them in your gut is a real thing. You listen to that and you don't have to listen to them.
That is so brilliant.
And she's like, well, Mom, I'll get in trouble. I said, I don't care. You can tell the principal to call me. It doesn't matter.
Oh, that's so brilliant.
Because when I grew up, it was, you know, you respect your elders and you listen to what they say and it doesn't matter. And it's so important for them to understand that just because it's an adult does not mean that they're making the good decisions or the right decisions.
That's right.
Matter of fact, most of them aren't.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, 10% of the male population are perpetrators.
10%, yes. And 90% of abuse happens with a family member or with someone the family knows.
Absolutely. And typically alcohol is involved.
Yes.
Yes. So, which is awareness, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, oh my goodness. I remember because my children are honest, they're probably your age. You know, all my 4 sons are in their 40s now. And I remember with my older ones, that was really huge. Like you teach your children to listen to adults and to be respectful. And I just, one day as I was like, oh my gosh, I have to stop teaching my children this.
Yeah.
I am creating unsafety for them, having no clue that that's what I was doing.
Right. Yes.
You know, and I was just repeating what we've all been told to do.
Yes.
And so, I mean, especially with my younger ones, I'm like, you guys, if somebody, I don't care who it is, You know, we had one family member that I was very suspicious about. I said, if this person, I told him to stay away from my children, but if mommy's not around for a minute, if he, you know, we weren't around him hardly ever. It was rare, like say a wedding, right? And I'm like, and if he comes close to you, you have permission to kick and scream and bite. I don't care. Whatever you need to do to protect you.
Yes.
And it was so interesting because at the reception, you know, we're in public. You think children are safe in public. They're not. Right? And so he comes over and puts his hand on my 4-year-old's leg, and my son kicked him.
Good.
And said, do not touch me.
Yeah.
And then he ran to me and told me, and I went out and said, and we went over and said to the man, I've already clearly told you. And do I need to call the police? You know?
Yeah.
This is not, but you know, it's so, and I think you guys found this out later about your grandfather, that he actually had made this confession, and your grandmother had even found the letter.
He wrote many confession letters.
Oh, Lord, where, and there were, you found out, oh, he didn't perpetrate just his family members.
No.
There were, I mean, and that's typical of perpetrators. There might be thousands of children.
Thousands. Yes.
Thousands. It's devastating, isn't
Yes.
it? Well, you know, last night when I was reading your book, and typically, honestly, I don't typically read trauma books late at night, you know, because I'm like, I want to sleep. I like to sleep.
Yeah.
And take care of myself.
Yeah.
And, but I could not put your book down. I just could not put it down. And so I kept checking in with my little girl.
Yeah.
How are you, sweetheart?
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Anything triggering you? You know? And it was, and then I finally like got out my journal before I went to sleep to make just double check.
Yes.
You know, anything you need to say, honey. And she's like, yeah, I'm pissed. And I'm like, ooh, tell me more. Right. Because I've learned, like you have learned, if we can be curious with this little child inside of us and compassionate.
Yes.
You know, so like, oh, what are you experiencing as we're reading this book?
Right.
You know, and is anything coming up for you that I need to attend to?
Right.
You know, is there anything you're needing? Is this bringing up something we haven't attended to inside of you? Because you know how it is with memories. You don't know if you've collected them all.
Yes.
You know, so I'm always open to the idea that I haven't.
Yes.
And so, yeah, she was just like, I'm pissed. This really needs to stop. Like children, no child should go through this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I love the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is really good work.
Thank you.
It's brave work. It's probably, is it braver work than being a stout woman?
Yes.
Yeah. By far, right?
Yes.
Bravest work you'll ever do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the most important.
And the most important and the most valuable.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you.
My heart is filled with appreciation for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for being my guest today. I'm all teared up right now. Yeah. So which is typical for me. I have Kleenex always at the end of a podcast. I'm like, oh, that was really touching. So thank you for being with us today. I hope that you will, as you're listening to this podcast, that you will be kind to yourself, that you will be gentle with yourself, that you will have empathy. And if this brought up any feelings for you, you're not alone. As you know from Kimberly's story and even my story, you're not alone. You're not shameful. You're not dirty. You're not bad. You didn't do something wrong. Something wrong happened to you, or maybe many wrong things happened to you. And it's not your fault. And I hope that from our stories, you've learned that, I don't know, probably for me, the biggest element of real, genuine healing has come from me learning how to hold my sweet little adaptive child inside of me on my lap and love her and be compassionate towards her and be kind with her and to stop blaming her, because for so many years, probably for decades, I blamed her and I shamed her. And I kind of took up where abusers stopped, and I could become self-abusive and act in and be very unkind towards her. So I hope that in some ways our stories can expedite this journey for you and give you permission to realize that she's not the bad one, or maybe that little boy is not the bad one. But sadly, adults do bad things, and and make really bad choices that are harmful and actually evil and tormenting. And you deserve to heal, and you deserve a life filled with love and joy and peace. So thank you for joining us today.